I'm going to use only one word to describe this new version of the ground and pound, and that is refined. But there's more, so stick around and find out what the differences are between this V2 and the V1. Welcome back to the Weather Base. Yes, there are more differences between these two versions of the ground and pound. Some obvious, like the aesthetics and practical aspects, and others less obvious. First things first, a quick word about the gear I'm using. I made a new bass. This is a 34-inch scale 5-string bass, passive, with a hybrid pickup that's inspired by a Precision and a Music Man pickup that I created from scratch. The concept of this instrument is taking the best of sound and technicalities from traditional bass guitars, but give it a modern twist. We will make a review of this bass as soon as possible. I recorded the loops through the Strobo Stomp Peterson tuner into the C24 effects, the Twain Becos compressor, into the Mozztronics Valve Direct Box Mark II, the DI2, and into the Audient ID24. And then I reamped these loops into the Da Capo reamp box. And for the pedals, I used a one-spot two-tone power supply. That's it. So what's new in the second version? Well, first, the ground and pound switch. Pound being similar to the voicing of the V1, but there are some slight differences that we'll get to. And ground uses a contour voicing that is based on the 800 series onboard preamp from Lusithand. In the intro song, I switch between the two voicings, but here's another sound sample to compare them. And I'll explain what the contour function of the ground voicing is and why it's cool right afterwards. When switching to ground, the sound is scooped. It's boosted in the lows and in the highs in a V shape. Now, because the saturation exists more in the mid frequencies, there is less distortion, but the sound is bigger and seems to have more of a 3D extension. Also, after having used the onboard 800 BM preamp in a concert and switching the contour on, I instantly had a better sound in the mix because my sound was muffled and it helped to clear it up. And this does the same. It makes the sound bigger, as I already mentioned, more modern and more refined. But if you prefer the pound, well, that's probably because you prefer more of a raw drive feeling. So the previous version could perfectly be fine for you, especially if you find one secondhand or discounted. But even when using the pound voicing on the V2, it's slightly different from the V1. Take a look at the settings on both pedals in the next sound sample, listen to it carefully and come up with your own conclusions. But we'll talk about it anyway. So the V1 to my ears has more of a typical drive pedal character. It's thicker. The V2, on the other hand, has more of a preamp sound, even in the pound mode. But it becomes even more obvious when you switch to the ground mode. Also, there wasn't any need for so much volume gain in the V1, so that has been corrected in the V2. All this to say that it's easier to control the volume of the pedal in the V2. And the overall gain of the distortion has been slightly reduced in the V2, making it more, well, that goes that word again, refined. Also, the V2 is a bit more transparent than the V1, even with the mix all the way up to wet. It has a bit more air, if you will. The box of the V2 is slightly bigger, it's taller, but that's due to the fact that it now has top-mounted jacks, which I think is pretty nice, especially when you have a crowded pedal board. What I do like better on the V1 is the grainy finish. It doesn't get dirty as quickly, and this one is like a finger magnet. You see the dust immediately. So yeah, I prefer the V1 when it comes to the finish. But that's my personal taste. Let's fiddle around with the controls. An important thing that I did not mention is that the ground voicing affects both the dry and wet signals, but more on that right afterwards. It's no wonder that in the manual, the ground voicing is described as the modern sounding one. When mixing in more of the wet signals, you can obviously add distortion, but you can also fine-tune the EQ of the sound with this tilt EQ control. So when lowering it, you are boosting the lows and reducing the highs. And you're doing exactly the opposite when you're raising the control, more highs, less lows. Also, another important feature inside the pedal this time is this switch. It attenuates the input signal level, making it especially useful when using an active bass or a passive bass with very high output pickups. In our case, we have been using it all the time with the switch off, with no attenuation, because my bass has a regular output pickup. However, if you're using pedals in front of it, in front of the ground and pound, like other overdrive pedals or a boost pedal, yeah, this is a great feature. It reinforces the preamp aspect of this pedal, especially with the ground voicing. What this means is that you can use the ground and pound to color your sound without any distortion by using the ground voicing, for example, and you still have access to the tilt EQ, which is a pretty interesting option. The distortion is based on a rat, the same as the first version, but as we already mentioned, it has a bit less gain, but it still can get nasty, massively nasty with so much low end and presence in the highs. So in the next sample, we are going to resume all that we have talked about, all that we mentioned about the new version, and we're going to use it as a lo-fi type of preamp, which is in fashion lately. Something that I'm quite convinced this pedal was not designed for. But here I am to mess it all up and to prove that it does a fantastic job at that. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. Follow me on Instagram at the Weatherbass channel. Thanks to you, Nuno, for sending me this V2. You gave it a lovely twist. You maintained the character and the essence of the first version that was aimed at simulating the amazing sound of the bass player from Tool, Justin Chancellor. And in this V2, you extended the concept by creating an effect that sounds bigger and wider and taller in a way. That definitely sounds more modern and closer even to Justin's sound. So this is a killer effect for anyone looking for that particular type of sound. I don't think there's another pedal that can do this sound on the market today.